Carl Jung issued a profound and often overlooked warning to those he called intuitive introverts, a type that corresponds closely to what we know today as the INFJ personality in the Myers-Briggs system. His caution wasn't a mere intellectual observation. It was a spiritual and psychological alarm bell. Jung understood that the very gifts that make INFJs extraordinary, visionary insight, deep empathy, and a natural connection to the unseen patterns of life, could also lead to their undoing if not balanced with grounded self-awareness. Jung saw intuitive introverts as individuals who live in an inner world of symbols, possibilities, and unconscious meaning. Their intuition, unlike that of extroverts who look outward to grasp patterns in the external world, is directed inward. It seeks understanding of the invisible, what lies beneath appearances, what moves behind human motives, and what destiny whispers through dreams and hunches. For Jung, this kind of intuition bordered on the mystical. He admired it, but he also feared its potential to devour the individual who possesses it. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Master Course today. The link is in the description of this video. His dark warning was simple yet severe. The intuitive introvert risks being swallowed by the unconscious. Because their attention turns inward toward the world of imagination, symbols, and ideal visions, they can lose touch with tangible reality. They begin to live more in what could be than in what is. For the INFJ, this manifests as an endless loop of introspection, idealism, and deep contemplation that can slowly detach them from the material and social realities around them. They may sense hidden meanings in every interaction, or see destinies unfolding where others see coincidences. Jung cautioned that when this intuitive world becomes too consuming, the person begins to project their unconscious contents, fears, desires, archetypes, onto the outer world. Jung described how an intuitive introvert can become possessed by the images of the unconscious. What this means for an INFJ is that their rich inner life, so full of vision, empathy, and moral conviction, can turn inwardly destructive when it is not balanced with external engagement. They can fall prey to fantasy, interpreting ordinary life through the lens of prophetic symbolism or spiritual importance that may have no grounding. They can begin to believe they understand people so deeply that they no longer test their insights against real feedback. Their empathy becomes omniscient in their own eyes, and their intuition, once a lamp of truth, turns into a flickering flame of illusion. He observed that the intuitive introvert often feels alienated from ordinary people because few can grasp the depth of their perception. This alienation can lead to a kind of spiritual pride, a feeling of being different, even chosen, because they see what others do not. For INFJs, this can be dangerously seductive. They may begin to withdraw even further into their inner sanctum, surrounding themselves with visions, causes, and emotional intensity. They might become disillusioned with the imperfections of the world, believing that only the world within them is pure enough to be real. Jung called this state inflation, when the ego identifies with the power of the unconscious and believes itself godlike, or uniquely burdened with insight. The danger here, he warned, is psychic isolation. When the INFJ becomes too inwardly absorbed, their intuition no longer serves connection, but becomes a defense against it. They start to filter every experience through intuition rather than direct engagement. Conversations become analyses, relationships become psychic readings, and life itself becomes a symbolic dream to decode. While this may give the INFJ a sense of mastery over meaning, it robs them of vitality and spontaneity. Jung believed that when intuition detaches from reality, it ceases to be a gift. It becomes a haunting. He also cautioned about the shadow that lurks within intuitive introverts. Because INFJs tend to identify with their light, compassion, understanding, moral conviction, they often repress their darker impulses, such as anger, pride, envy, and desire for control. Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious will not disappear. It will act from the shadows. For INFJs, this means their suppressed darkness can emerge indirectly, through emotional manipulation, silent judgment, moral superiority, or burnout masked as martyrdom. They can become deeply resentful while convincing themselves they are simply helping others. Jung's remedy for this was not to abandon intuition, but to anchor it in conscious life. He taught that the intuitive introvert must learn to make their visions concrete, to bring their insights into practical form, and to confront the shadow that accompanies their light. For the INFJ, this means turning their compassion into real service, their insight into constructive dialogue, and their ideals into achievable goals. It means balancing contemplation with action, empathy with boundaries, and spirituality with realism. He emphasized the need for what he called individuation, the lifelong process of integrating all parts of oneself, both conscious and unconscious. For an INFJ, individuation means recognizing that being a visionary does not exempt them from being human. It requires humility, the courage to admit they do not know everything, that their intuition can be wrong, and that even their noble motives can hide selfish desires. Jung's warning thus wasn't a condemnation, but an invitation to maturity, to hold the tension between the world of dreams and the demands of reality. He wrote that when the intuitive introvert integrates their shadow and grounds their inner world, they become a bridge between the seen and unseen, a true seer who brings light to others without being consumed by it. But if they fail, they risk becoming prisoners of their own insight, living in a labyrinth of symbols that no longer serve life but drain it. For the INFJ, Jung's dark warning remains as relevant today as it was a century ago. The modern world rewards distraction, superficiality, and constant noise, conditions that make INFJs retreat deeper into their inner worlds. They scroll through online chaos, sensing the spiritual disconnection of humanity, feeling overwhelmed yet powerless. Many INFJs respond by disappearing, physically or emotionally, seeking refuge in solitude, imagination, or idealistic causes. Jung would have said, this is precisely the moment they must resist the pull of the unconscious abyss. They must return to life, to the body, to the present moment. They must do something real with what they see. In his view, the intuitive introvert's salvation lies in embodiment, in giving form to what is formless within them. For the INFJ, this might mean writing, teaching, mentoring, painting, or advocating. It means translating intuition into creation, empathy into healing, and ideals into tangible change. Only then does intuition become a tool of wholeness rather than a trap of fantasy. Jung's dark warning, then, is not merely psychological, it is moral and spiritual. The INFJ's light can illuminate or it can burn. Their depth can heal or it can drown. Their intuition can guide humanity or deceive them into thinking they are above it. Jung's message was that every intuitive introvert must descend into their own depths, face their darkness, and rise again, not as a dreamer lost in visions, but as a whole human being whose inner sight serves the living world. That is the true challenge of being an INFJ, to live between vision and reality without losing either, to walk through darkness without mistaking it for light, and to honor intuition not as a crown of superiority, but as a sacred responsibility. Only then does the INFJ fulfill Jung's ultimate hope. That intuition, when grounded in consciousness and humility, becomes not a curse, but a path to wisdom and transformation. He also cautioned that one of the most insidious dangers facing the intuitive introvert is their tendency to fall in love with their inner world, so much so that they begin to substitute imagination for life itself. For the INFJ, whose mind is an entire universe of ideas, feelings, and spiritual patterns, the boundary between vision and reality can blur. They might prefer the perfection of their internal ideals to the imperfection of the outer world. In Jung's words, they may take the symbol for the thing, mistaking the beauty of their inner imagery for actual transformation. This creates what Jung described as psychic inflation through fantasy. The INFJ begins to identify not just with what they imagine, but with the archetypal roles within those imaginations. The healer, the savior, the wise one, the misunderstood prophet. They start to live out unconscious mythic dramas instead of human experiences. In doing so, they risk losing their humanity in the pursuit of their own symbolic significance. Jung believed this was one of the gravest psychological dangers, when the individual starts living as if they are an idea rather than a person. For the INFJ, this can manifest as a subtle detachment, a sense that they're somehow above the messiness of ordinary life because their mind operates on a higher wavelength. He warned that this kind of self-identification with archetypes leads to ego, unconscious fusion. The INFJ might mistake an impulse from the depths of their psyche for divine revelation or prophetic truth. Their insights, once humble and organic, can start to feel absolute. They stop questioning themselves because they have begun to feel like a vessel of universal wisdom. Jung observed that once this happens, intuition becomes contaminated. It no longer reflects objective truth, but rather the projections of a swollen ego. The INFJ's perception, though still sharp, becomes distorted by self-importance cloaked as enlightenment. This is where Jung's dark insight becomes painfully real. The intuitive introvert can become possessed by their own light. When this happens, the INFJ no longer listens. They proclaim. They no longer discern. They declare. Their inner world becomes an echo chamber of ideals and meanings that seem sacred, but are often just unexamined reflections of their own fears, wounds, or unmet desires. Jung warned that this possession by the archetype can lead to psychological breakdown, depression, mania, or existential crisis, because the conscious mind can only bear so much of the unconscious before it collapses under the weight of its mystery. To counter this, he urged intuitive introverts to cultivate what he called active imagination. This wasn't mere daydreaming. It was a disciplined dialogue with the unconscious. The INFJ, he suggested, should engage their inner imagery not as truth but as conversation. They must learn to question what arises from within. Why am I seeing this symbol? What is this dream trying to show me about myself? In this way, the INFJ transforms intuition from a flood into a stream, something that nourishes rather than overwhelms. Jung believed that this practice could turn the inner chaos into wisdom by forcing the introvert to relate to, rather than be ruled by, their inner world. Another key warning Jung offered was about the danger of moral absolutism. Because intuitive introverts are so attuned to ideals and higher meanings, they often see morality not as relative but as cosmic truth. INFJs, especially those deeply spiritual or philosophical, can fall into the trap of believing they must save, correct, or enlighten others. Jung noted that this messianic tendency stems from the intuitive introvert's unconscious identification with the archetype of the Redeemer, the one who bears light into darkness. Yet in this noble impulse lies peril. The INFJ can unconsciously impose their vision of truth upon others, crossing from compassion into control. Their love for humanity becomes a mission to reform it, and their empathy turns into subtle dominance. He saw this as a kind of shadow inflation, where goodness itself becomes the instrument of darkness. The INFJ's shadow hides in their virtue. Behind the desire to help, there may be a need to feel indispensable. Behind humility, there may be quiet pride in being different. This is why Jung stressed that the intuitive introvert must confront not just their fears or traumas, but their goodness too, the ways in which their light disguises egoic need. The true path of growth, he said, is the path of integration, not perfection. Jung's warning extended even further. He believed that the intuitive introvert's isolation can make them vulnerable to the collective unconscious. When cut off from human contact, they begin to absorb not just their own inner material, but the unprocessed emotions of humanity itself. This explains why INFJs often feel inexplicable waves of sadness, dread, or inspiration that seem to have no personal source. Jung understood this as a psychic openness to archetypal energies. While this gives INFJs their almost supernatural empathy, it can also crush them under emotional weight that isn't theirs to carry. Without grounding practices, physical movement, routine, real relationships, the intuitive introvert becomes an emotional sponge for the world's chaos. He urged such individuals to establish rituals of grounding, gardening, journaling, crafting, or simply spending time in nature. to remind their psyche that they are incarnate beings, not disembodied spirits. For the INFJ, whose intuitive sensitivity makes them absorb everything, grounding is not optional, it's survival. Jung believed that intuition must always find embodiment in matter. Otherwise, it becomes destructive both to the person and those around them. He also warned that intuitive introverts often mistake withdrawal for wisdom. INFJs, when overwhelmed or misunderstood, retreat into solitude, believing that silence will protect them from the world's shallowness. Jung respected solitude, but he made an important distinction. Isolation for reflection is healthy. Isolation for avoidance is soul-numbing. The danger lies in stagnation. The INFJ begins to live off the echoes of their own thoughts, growing ever more certain, yet increasingly disconnected. Their insight loses freshness because it is no longer tested by the friction of life. Jung insisted that consciousness evolves only through relationship, with others, with work, with nature. Without this contact, the intuitive introvert's mind becomes a stagnant pool, reflecting only itself. Jung also warned about the existential fatigue that comes when intuition bears too much knowledge. The INFJ's ability to perceive hidden motives and potential outcomes gives them a sense of foresight, but also a heavy burden. They often see too far, feel too much, and understand too deeply what others cannot. Jung described this as the loneliness of the seer. Such people, he said, risk despair when they realize that most of the world neither sees nor cares about the truths they hold dear. The INFJ, in response, may begin to lose faith in humanity, or sink into cynicism masked as wisdom. To this he offered one of his most compassionate counsels: serve quietly and live symbolically. He believed the intuitive introvert's task is not to convert others, but to embody what they have seen, to live as a quiet beacon, letting their integrity and authenticity speak louder than their visions. They're not called to shout their insight, but to live it. The INFJ's redemption lies not in saving the world, but in remaining true to the whisper within, while still walking humbly among the ordinary. Jung went even deeper in his warnings about the psychic cost of intuition unrestrained by discipline. He observed that intuitive introverts, particularly those with a moral or spiritual disposition like the INFJ, often experience periods of intense illumination followed by deep darkness. Their psyche moves like a pendulum between revelation and desolation. For Jung, this was not random. It was the psyche's way of demanding balance. When an INFJ ascends too high into the abstract or mystical realms of intuition, the unconscious eventually pulls them downward into the earthy, even painful, aspects of existence. Jung called this descent the return to the shadow of reality. It is as though the soul itself insists that enlightenment must be paid for with humility. This explains why many INFJs experience cycles of creative highs followed by inexplicable exhaustion, spiritual dryness, or existential emptiness. Jung would say this is not a failure of faith or imagination, but the natural rhythm of psychic compensation, the unconscious restoring what the ego has neglected. The intuitive introvert cannot live perpetually in vision. They must also descend into embodiment. Yet many resist this descent, interpreting it as loss rather than correction. Jung's warning here is subtle but profound. When you avoid the darkness, you make it darker. For the INFJ, healing begins not by escaping the lows, but by understanding that even the darkness carries meaning. He also noted that the intuitive introvert's relationship with time is uniquely dangerous. Because their intuition is future-oriented, they tend to live perpetually ahead of themselves, anticipating, predicting, imagining. The INFJ rarely experiences the present as it is. They experience it as a seed of what could be. While this gives them visionary foresight, it also robs them of presence. Jung described this as psychic displacement, where consciousness is pulled toward what is becoming rather than what is. For INFJs, this can result in chronic dissatisfaction. No matter how good life feels, it always seems like something more meaningful is just beyond the horizon. Over time, this erodes their capacity for gratitude and joy. Jung would urge the INFJ to learn the art of being here and enjoying the present moment.